Okay, let's just dive right into this. This is my 1800 engine. It's a Type 1 74 stroke by 88 slip-in piston, and as you may have noted at the end of one of my rides on Heartbreak Hill, I came around back and the oil pressure at idle with just over 1,000 RPM was 7 psi. That really bothered me. This is a great running motor, but doggone it, you know, I sure wish it had better oil pressure. I had a 1776 for years that had like 18 pounds oil pressure at an idle, and I tried different weight oils, did different things, different types of additives, and it always ran great, and I just didn't worry about it. I always worried about it. But it ran for 20 years that way, and nothing seemed to affect it or change it. And on this particular engine, the day after I put it together, I had broke it in, did my cam brake in. The next day, I headed out on a 3,000 mile vacation trip, went to Portland, Oregon. I started noticing that I just had these engine temperature problems. My temperature went up and my oil pressure wasn't as good as it should have been. And I didn't know I was having carburetor issues. I just was having a struggle there for a while, and I didn't know if I'd be able to just drive it home that way. And as it turned out, everything worked out great, and here it is. And I then moved it from the car and put it in the dune buggy, and I had oil spotting issues from those stripped oil pump bolts, and I have since corrected that. It seems to be holding. And I got to thinking about what could possibly be giving me this low oil pressure. And as soon as I touch give it some gas, the oil pressure starts coming back up. And I don't know if this gauge is really something to be relied on. It's a glycerin-filled 60-pound gauge. I probably shouldn't be driving around with it on there. I'm not sure if it's even totally that accurate. I need to compare it with another gauge, but it was the only back-mounted gauge I had. And I think I put that on when I transferred it into the buggy just to kind of keep an eye on things, because I had the VDO oil pressure gauge in my Baja Bug for the trip, and I wanted to keep an eye on it because it was a concern to me, and I know that your oil pressure is a concern for you. So I got to thinking about an episode that happened to me last year. I never realized this before. When I got that 1776 single port, that's a single relief case, and I had to have some work done on it, and I was at a Volkswagen machine shop, and I was asking the guy questions, so on and so forth, and he said, I says, do I need to have a special piston for that oil relief? Because I just had a raw, fresh, empty case. It was used, but there was nothing on it. That thing was stripped down. And he says, oh yeah, you do. And he went in the back, and he came back out, and he says, here you go. And I bought a few $100s worth of stuff for him, and I said, what do I owe you? He says, just keep it. And I said, well, thank you very much. Well, I came home, and I went to put it in the engine, and it wouldn't fit. And I thought, what? What's the deal? The piston, he told me that this was for a single relief case, and it didn't fit. So what's the deal? So I've had different setups. These are the aftermarket ones that they claim are supposed to give you more pressure and so on and so forth, and they give you these different style of pistons, and this is all about the oil cooler, protecting your oil cooler. A lot of guys got it in their head that they got to run 20-50 oil if they got a hot rod engine, and this is not going to be turning into an oil debate on my side. I don't care what you run, as long as you're happy with it and you change it often and you got a filter. So, at any rate, I thought, I know I've changed this. I changed weights of oil. I figured since I was going to be on the highway, I'd try some of that 20-50 oil. And it was in March, and I was going across Idaho, and I just, that actually my engine temperatures were going up. So when I got to my buddy's house in Boise, I changed it back to 30 weight oil, the VR1 Valvoline, because it has the zinc in it, and that didn't help a thing. it started off great on the trip, and I mean the engine runs great. I can't you know, tell you that enough. I'm just tickled to death with it. It's been said that trying to line bore an oil case is hopeless. If you'll have problems. There's distortion. There's places where you're going to get oil leakage, and you know, I thought, gosh, who's got $800 to spend for a case nowadays, you know? But it was always that way. 25 years ago, when cases were $400, we bitched about it the same because our wages were lower. Now our wages are higher and the price of the case has gone up. Well, I mean, what can I tell you? It's that old economics thing about buying power. Nothing costs any more than it did. You know, you look at a $300,000 house and you say, well, hell, that's way expensive for a starter home, you know, just starting off. Well, no, it's not. The half price of a house, that's the same as a $30,000 house was 30 years ago. Maybe 40. But the fact is, you know, when you made $10,000 a year, you spent a house costs $30,000. Now you make $100,000 a year, and it costs $300,000. I don't know how that crap works, but at any rate, it's better to start off if you're doing an expensive project. But you know, it is what it is. Had an AS21 case, wanted to keep that, and just sort of wanted to go. So you've got two relief valves. You got the flywheel side, and then you got the back of the car. This one right here, this is the one that protects your oil cooler. And you'll always see these heavy duty springs to increase your oil pressure. It doesn't increase your oil pressure. There is a relief dump hole that goes into the crankcase for extreme conditions. But primarily what this thing is all about is to save your oil cooler. And if you're running an external oil cooler like this, you could use this thing for a hammer. These things are just tough as a nail, and that's when you can not have to worry about your oil cooler. Either way you go, through your oil cooler or directly through the mains, you're getting oil to those main bearings and so on and so forth. And that's what's important, is to always have the oil there. Now, I will caution you though, if you're striving to run coolest oil temperature possible, that's not necessarily a good thing. You should have your oil temperature operating temperature for your oil should be over 180 degrees, and a lot of times I see mine down around 50 degrees, and it's especially bad. That is why it's so bad to do short-term driving. If you're just running to the store, shutting it off and doing all these little short hops, and what happens is you heat it up enough that you get condensation, you get moisture. These are naturally aspirated engines, and you're drawing whatever the humidity is in the air around you, and you get blow-by into your pistons, and there's just different places where it can come from. You form acids, you got moisture in your oil, and in order to get that water out of your oil, you need to vaporize it. You need to flash it off. It's okay to get up to 210 degrees, and it's good to drive your car on the road once in a while, and it's best to probably drive it at least 10 miles when you do drive it, you know. And a lot of times we do that. Sometimes we just don't have time, and that can affect the frequency of your oils. And that tells you in the manual, short stop and go driving, you know, that's more severe duty, and you need to change your oil more often. And these springs and relief valves help protect your engine. There's two different systems. You've got the long spring on the dual relief cases. You got a long spring and you got the short spring. This one goes on the flywheel side. This one goes on the back of the car. And usually, even the factory put in this type of a piston in some of the later years. Now, I wanted to check it out on this car. And these things can be difficult. And the engine was still a little bit warm. I knew I was going to take a bath in the oil. And the way I do it is to use the biggest screwdriver I've got. And that's more for alignment, to keep it straight. You don't want to strip out that slot in the plug here. This can be a booger. And I have on one of my engines, maybe more than one of my engines, they have Aftermarket has addressed this, and they've got like a hex head here so that you can use a socket. Boy, is that sweet! I think it might even be on my 2-liter here. Let's take a look. Yeah, here's one right here. See, you can use a Allen wrench. What is that? Is that Allen? No, it's square. It's probably like, I don't know. Maybe it's 1/4-inch drive, or you've got, you can use a crescent wrench, whatever the hell, you got a spanner, a box end wrench. Nobody uses a crescent wrench, right? Okay, so this is a neat Aftermarket thing that I thought was worthwhile. But I haven't seen them in a while. Some of these things just come on the market, somebody gets a great idea, produces it, sells it, and then they go away, and you say, that was a great idea. Well, how often do you need to buy one of those, you know? So, at any rate, I pulled, let's see, which one was it? It was probably, I just threw it off here to the side. Now, I got the plug loose. The spring fell out, the short one, because it was the one on the flywheel side. That is your oil control valve. In the old single relief cases, you only had one spring and relief valve, and it did both jobs at the same time. Later on, when they went from the 22 millimeter pump to the 26 millimeter pump and made the oil passages bigger and the oil cooler bigger and everything else, they added the oil control valve, which is at the end of the line of your oil system, and it just dumps off excess oil. It makes sure, so the front long one protects your oil cooler, the back one makes sure that you have enough oil to your main bearings at all times, and having extremely high oil pressure, putting a big pump in, it's the old racer rule is 10 pounds per 1,000 RPM. So if you got an engine that's going to turn 7,000 RPM, you need to make sure you have 70 psi oil pressure at that RPM in order to be getting full flow. And as I've explained many times, a race engine that's built for that kind of RPM and high horsepower is usually built to looser tolerances because there's some motion going on there. There's vibration and harmonics, and in order to keep that together, you just sort of like capture it. All these smaller engines below 2 liters, yeah, you can get higher RPM. The bigger the engine, the bigger the stroke, the more dangerous and more difficult it is to get that higher RPM, and you don't need to because it's got more horsepower and torque down low. That's the whole idea of building these things. That's the sweet part of having one of these things. A stock 1600 engine's got plenty of power and torque for on the street, normal type of driving. If you get into specialized situations, that's when you say to yourself, hey, when it comes time to rebuild your engine and you're thinking about, well, I got to buy this anyhow, it's just a couple bucks more to get this upgrade, but you got to make sure that you keep a whole system going. So what I found, I had tried these springs, and I had a spring similar to this one, and the piston wouldn't come out because the oil kind of creates like a vacuum. And I have this special tool that's made, it's a Volkswagen tool, and it fits up inside the back of your plunger, and it's difficult to get in there normally. And then you turn the T handle and it spreads this apart, and then you can pull it right down. And you want to feel it. Make sure that you're feeling it. If it's jammed or stuck in there, you may have some other issues going on, and you could have some metal or something that's inside here. You look for scratch marks. This one's got some scratch marks where it's been moved up and down, and it doesn't look extremely like it's had a happy life, but those are the things you want to check. Now, as I started about 30 minutes ago telling you, that guy sold me the valve, and it was too big to go up the tunnel. And so I took my caliper, and you just zero it out. I love these calipers you buy a cheap one. It doesn't matter if it's accurate or not. This one, I dropped it and cracked the face. It still works. You've got this rack here with gear teeth in it. Open this thing up, clean it out. It's got a cover over it back here, but open it up and spray some carb cleaner and then put some lubricant in there. You don't want to just have it dry, because then you will have a discrepancy. And if you want to check it for accuracy, here's a couple feeler gauges I got out. And here's an old one, and this says 4,000, and that's what it is, it's 4,000. And the other side, same thing, 4,000. And the back side here, you can do the inside measurements. And the end of it here, you use it for a depth gauge. And it's just sweet as heck. I just love these things. This is, I don't know, S-M-I-E-C, SMIEC. I don't even know how you say it. Who cares? It wasn't that much. I use it for, it surprises me how much I used it for. So, when I started looking at these different pistons, this one, let's just say 646. Doesn't matter if it's accurate, we're using the same tool to measure it, okay? That's the point here. This one says 630. Okay, 46 to 30, that's 15 thousandths. Here's another one, 29. 29. 21, 621. Oop. Oop. Try to get it on there straight across. 20. Okay, so they're different thicknesses, and it came in my mind that, oh my gosh, if it's a sloppy fit, then oil's going to be escaping around the piston part. Well, it doesn't really have any. I hope it's on the next page. It doesn't really have any place to go. If you look at the drawing here, here's the front one that saves your oil cooler, and here's the one in question back here, your oil control, and that's supposed to allow it to go for more. So it's kind of like a T, basically. It's pushing the piston of it. When it gets excessive pressure, it comes down and bleeds off to the side. And my concern was, well, it's bleeding off the side, or maybe it's stuck partially down. It can be jammed. There's always, you know, accidental debris and that damn silicone and different odds and ends that can get in there and get it to catch where you're losing oil pressure right from the start. So I took it out and I measured the piston, because I didn't know this until last year. These variants in piston size, I just saw, oh yeah, here's a high pressure piston, and I bought one and I put it in, and it's like, okay, everything's good. And you know, without knowledge is power. Now, here is something else that might. Here's a whole chart that tells you about the different lengths and the different years and the different pounds of pressure. Look, 68, 69, 9 pounds of pressure. 70 to 71, 12 to 16 pounds of pressure. What happened? They went to the 26 millimeter pump. Pressure control spring, 8 pounds, 6 to 8 pounds. Pressure control spring, 6 to 8 pounds. It tells you the length of the spring, and it tells you the tension of the spring. So how are you going to measure that? You're going to have an accurate digital scale, and then it gives you your length. You could set it on your drill press. You could put the scale on the bottom. I was going to set that all up with my refrigeration scale, because it's accurate enough to measure something like that. I'm not so sure how high those gram scales go, but we do measure pistons and stuff, so I'm not sure what the range is. But if you really want to get it accurate to the year and do this correctly, that's what you need to do. There was the early oil cooler and the late oil cooler there. So all these heavy-duty shiny springs that you buy, it's not necessarily a good thing to over-lubricate your main bearings. It's not one of those situations where if a little bit of pressure is good, a whole lot's a lot better. And I'm not a scientist or a physics professor, but I am a pursuer of knowledge, and when you start getting into these things, like, there's always other opportunities to come up. It's called washing your bearings, and it may have been one of the blue books, but someplace I was reading about how if you can have a wonderful car and it can run fine, and you can be ignorant to all this, and you can drive it like a total idiot, you can not warm it up, jump in it and go, you can do anything, and these cars in stock form will last for years. But then there's other people who are just a little bit more interested in it, and if you're going to spend $4,000 or $5,000 to rebuild an engine and improve the carburation and performance and exhaust system and all that sort of stuff, you kind of want to protect your investment. And that's when these things start becoming more interesting, and you want to find out a little bit more about them. And if you're going to make the upgrades, or if you're having problems, what's the source of the problem? All I did was change a piston, and I didn't have I thought, well, maybe I'd have too small of a piston and a big bore. What about that? Okay. Now, then I thought, okay, it felt pretty snug, and I think it was just the oil that was holding it, but it didn't fall out. That's for doggone sure. And then I got to thinking last night, I says, you know, wonder if that thing, when it gets hot, of course you got good oil pressure when your engine's cold. You first start it up, your oil viscosity is a little thicker, your pressure is higher, then it starts going down, right? And I thought, I wonder if the piston, because of the thermal dynamics, if the piston is too big but still fits in the bore, maybe it's tightening up. Maybe that case is expanding and squeezing around that piston and preventing it from moving. And maybe it's in a partial open position. I was waking up in a fright. It's like first thing this morning, I want to go out there and I want to pull that piston. I'm going to put a smaller one in there because it looks like the hole is at the head of the piston. And then as it comes down, it moves over. I even, on one of my engines, had this threaded, it was a whole device that you bought. It had the screw like this, and it had an Allen head bolt in it, and an O-ring, and a little capture cup, and you could tighten it down and increase your oil pressure by operating that thing. And I ran it for years and years and years, put it in, and doggone thing leaked all the time, and it, you know, I had it in my head that I was doing something better because it was aftermarket, because stock was just for stockers, and I don't have any stockers, and I'm going to buy the aftermarket stuff that says high performance on it. And you know what? There's a huge bunch of manufacturers out there that are more than happy to take your money, because that's how they get your money. They talk, they you know, our stuff is better than stock. You know, don't keep a stock camshaft. Throw that thing in the trash. Well, you know what? Probably that stock camshaft is the perfect camshaft, but yours is wore down so far that no matter what you put in, it's going to be an improvement. You put a new stock camshaft in and rebuild your engine, get it up to spec and normal, you know, operation, and you say, oh my God, this thing's got so much power, and you will love it. Anyhow, it is what it is. You think what you want, and this is how we do it at the TheEZGZ channel. We provide information so that you can make your own choices. Did I mention that after I changed pistons and put it back together, my oil pressure went from 7 hot to like 12? Anyhow, hope this has been interesting and helpful to some of you. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subbing. TheEZGZ.